Welcome to today's episode called Tough Jews, the True Nature of the Jewish Tribe. I could not have thought of a more fitting and perfect guest than Aaron Hadida. To many, Aaron needs no introduction, but to the very few who may not know about him, where do we even begin with how many impressive accomplishments Aaron has had in the past, from having the Jewish Resistance Initiative, Director of Security of Herut, Canada, being a top security consultant for synagogues and Jewish events, not only in Canada, but North America and even worldwide, being a top personal security detail for a very prominent member of the Muslim Zionist community. And most recently, Aaron just added the title of author with his most recent book. And so I am very impressed, very honored to have you on, Aaron. And so a little bit of background, how this topic even came into play. So growing up, I grew up in a fairly, half Jewish, half Italian community in New Jersey. And I really went into the narrative that was popular, unfortunately, in the mainstream media, that Jews were weak, right? We were studious only. Not that there's anything wrong with being studious, but if in a fight, we would not be looking for the Jew to protect us, right? When we learned about the Holocaust, we learned, unfortunately, only one narrative, which does not signify what actually happened in terms of bravery of Jews. We were only taught that Jews hid, right? And so the first time I only learned that Jews were tough was when I was reading anything about Israel, right? We hear about the tough Israeli soldiers, the tough Israeli generals. But here in America, we have, and I'm sure in Canada as well, it's the Woody Allen stereotype of Jews, right? Like Jews are weak. And at first, I only thought it was an outside Jewish perspective on Jews. But the more I started being integrated into the Jewish community, especially since I got into Zionism education 8-9 years ago, I realized that even internally, we have this incorrect stereotype, and unfortunately we do see it when there's anti-Semitic incidents happening, in America. They hyper focus in on certain segments of our population, showing Jews running away, showing Jews not fighting. But then you see another side, right? When we saw the riots in 2020, they were showing, Persian Jews in LA with their guns protecting, their businesses, tough Jews in Miami, in New York, the Bahrain community came out in full force, against the attackers. And then I started reading also about the Jewish mafia, here in America, and how not only obviously they forged alliances with the Italians and they made it what it was, and they were revered as also tough Jews. But then during the 1930s, they were fighting hand in hand with Nazi supporters, like here in America, and they were actually hired to provide security for a lot of events. And so for a while, I would say for the past 6-7 months, I really wanted to do a podcast on who we really are, as the people. We've been around for, close to 5,000 years, and how many civilizations have come and gone. We're here, and not only are we here and holding on, we're here and thriving, right? Like if you think of our people, we're the strongest we've ever been. And it's just going to continue and we're just going to continue to get stronger and stronger. And so I really wanted to talk about this juxtaposition of what the purview, outlook is on what Jews are, like weak and docile and just studious, as opposed to what the real nature of us, really is composed of, right? When you think of the Judean warriors, who fought back entire armies, right? And that all trickled down. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. So not to take up too much more time, I just wanted to provide our audience with a background of how this topic even came about. So again, I could not have thought of a better guest than you, Aaron. So if you could delve a little bit more into your own background, because you yourself do not come from a, what many would say is a traditional Jewish background of sorts. So I know we talked off record a little bit that you grew up Orthodox, your own father's bravery, your own experiences with having to be tough. So if you could get into a little bit of that for us today.
For sure. So it's a pleasure to be with you on here. It's great to be here. I've been following you for quite some time, and I'm very impressed with all of your writing and everything that you're doing. I'm right on board with, and I fully support. And the fact that you're, taking back the narrative, so to speak, changing the narrative is amazing, because there's so many falsehoods being spoken every single day all over social media. There's just terminology that's damaging for the community. And 99% of it comes from within. So I really respect the fact that you're doing that, and I applaud it, and everybody should support it 100%. You touched on a few things that struck chords with me. Jewish gangsters, first of all, were the real tough guys. They were the real tough guys. I mean, no two ways about it. There was a reason why Golda Meir flew to Cuba to see Meyer Lansky when the Nazis were coming. She didn't go see a president of any country. She went to go see the top gangster and the top Jewish gangster. So, I have been watching and studying and reading my whole life about the Jewish gangsters. And I mean, some people grow up and, their heroes are Superman and Batman. And, while I loved them too, growing up, my heroes, and some might think I'm nuts, but my heroes were like Benny Siegel and Lucky Buchalter and, Meyer Lansky, Arnold Rothstein. Those were the guys that commanded respect and that could move mountains when they wanted to move a mountain. And so for me, that's what struck a chord growing up. I saw that they could do what they wanted, when they wanted, where they wanted, and how they wanted. And I didn't ever think of it. Maybe early on I did, but I didn't really think of it in terms of what it could do for me. I thought more in terms of what it could do for the community and how it could protect the Jewish community. That if our enemies or our haters saw that the Jews weren't, like you said, just studious, just accountants and lawyers and doctors, that they would think twice about attacking the Jewish community around the world. And the absolute truth of it is, it's not just God bless Israel and the IDF and the way they train every single soldier and the intel departments. And it's just, I can talk about it all day long because that's my passion. Israel and the IDF are 100% what I believe in. But around the world, we have many, many, many Jews that are seriously tough. And tough is a broad term. It doesn't specifically apply to just being physically tough, mentally tough, willing to stand up and not sit idly by while your community's under attack. And whether it's somebody spraying a swastika, spray painting swastikas on a shul or a school or a sidewalk, or whether you're in a restaurant and you see somebody getting beat up. Tough is a mindset. Tough means you act when you're called upon. And the reason I believe that the world sees Jews as, these academics and not really tough people. And by the way, some of my very close friends are top fighters, and every time they win, which is very frequently, they're raising the Israeli flag. And their gloves have a Magen David, and their, T-shirts have a Magen David. And one, is running around training right now, and his shirt has a huge Magen David, and it says Jiu-Jitsu on it. And that's a tough Jew, that's a don't mess with these guys kind of people. And they're not arrogant. They don't, anybody that's truly tough, and I grew up around tons of them, they don't show it. They don't feel the need to prove it. The people who aren't tough feel like they need to prove it. People who are truly tough, and some of my best friends, they never have to prove it. And 99 times out of 100 will walk away from a fight because what for? It's just not necessary. But Jews have gotten that rap, and I think that the tides have definitely turned. I think, throughout the world's history, the Jewish history, we've seen a lot of, seriously brave warriors and groups of warriors. And like you mentioned, in Nazi Germany, not all the Jews had to go and hide and walk quietly into their deaths. A lot of them went to the forests, amassed weapons, and started fighting back. Pockets of resistance and saving children and saving babies and working with allies who weren't Jewish, God bless them, and helping to save countless lives. And so, I mean, that's what it's about. That's what being a tough Jew means. It means that you don't look at necessarily your own personal security. You look at the community around you first and foremost. And then you worry about your security. And I'm not saying be callous with your life. That's not at all what I'm saying. But I'm saying make sure that your mindset is that, that if your community is under attack, you're not just sitting around looking at it saying, that's not good, and that's unfortunately been the premise behind our history. And the reason for it, if you want to get deep into it, Jewish law stipulates, halacha stipulates, that we're allowed to defend ourselves, but it never says we can go on the offense. It says we can defend ourselves. It says unnecessary killing, unnecessary damage to another human being is not permissible. But in some cases it is. So it's like, okay, is it or isn't it? You know what I mean? And the religious Jews adopt that mentality, but any rabbi that I work with or have ever worked with will be the first one to say, listen, Aaron, it's by law. Jews have to defend themselves. They have to take action. You can't sit idly by while another Jew is being attacked. It's just not
actually against Judaism to
right.
be weak and defenseless. So
right.
you mentioned a point that I'd like to expand upon. You said you grew up around tough Jews, but I know that we talked off camera that you grew up Orthodox and you're Sephardic. So can you tell me a little bit about your community that you grew up in and your involvement with boxing and your brother, being very influential in your life, like through boxing, and how that also came to grow you also into a much tougher Jew?
So the easy answer is I grew up in very bad neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. Prior to my being born, those neighborhoods were all Jewish. And by the time I was born, they started the Jewish population in that neighborhood started moving further north. And so by the time I was of age, where I was going to school, I was sort of the odd man out. I was wearing a kippah. I was, walking to my Hebrew school every day or taking buses with a kippah on. And, I stood out. I was wearing tzitzit, I definitely stood out. I went to a yeshiva, a day school. And so my neighborhood was, not Jewish, predominantly the Black community were all my friends. I didn't know from racism up until, I did, and so, it sort of forced me to learn how to fight. It forced me to adopt that mindset. And it just so happened that one of my brothers, Ralph, was teaching boxing at the Jewish Community Center. And that started me out as a young kid. I started attending a few of his classes. and I started hitting the bags and, learning how to strike and what to do and what not to do. And later on in life, I went to another boxing club, a more professional boxing club. And I was in love with it. It just, every day I couldn't wait to get there. And so that's what we did. But those around me that were Jewish also were forced into the same thing because we all lived in the same neighborhoods. We went to the same schools. We got bullied the same way when we were 6, 7 years old. They would take our kippas off and throw them in the dirt and step on them. And I mean, that happened a few times until we all formed this crew and learned how to fight and said, that's never going to happen. And, we used to go downtown on the weekends, to go shopping at this big mall in downtown Toronto. And our parents used to always tell us, make sure you take off your kippas when, before you get there. And we were like, yeah, right, screw that. Like by this time, there was like 8 or 9 of us. We were all in our minds, little badasses, and we were just like itching for a fight. We were like, all right, bring it on, try to take my keep off. And so when you develop that at an early age, and then you hone it with real skills, and that mindset where you just don't care, like, come at me, do what you got to do. And it's all in the name of community, though. It's nothing to do with bullying people. On the contrary, some of my best friends growing up, I met because they were being bullied and I stepped in to help them, or some of my friends stepped in to help them. And that's how we became so close. And, it was just never okay for me to watch somebody being bullied or picked on. I don't understand to this day how somebody can see a person being beat up on the street or in a school or whatever and just walk by like nothing happened. I don't get it. And, some people will say, well, you shouldn't get involved. You never know what that person's going to do and whatever. Okay, I get it. But if you do nothing, then I can guarantee you what that person's going to do. I can tell you exactly what that person's going to do, and it's not going to be good. He's victimizing anyone and everyone and anyone he can. And that's not cool. And, a lot of my friends fight for sport. They fight professionally and they fight for sport. And, these aren't guys that you ever want to mess with. And these are also not guys that will ever be in a restaurant seeing another Jew beat up and just sit there and watch it. It'll never happen. And I can guarantee you they will risk their professional status to step in and save a Jewish life. And that's the mindset. That's what it's all about. And, back in the day, with Rabbi Kahana, he adopted a philosophy that, his slogan was every Jew with a 22. And, it was not sort of literal for him. It was just sort of a mindset. Like Jews should and can be tough and defend themselves.
And as well, right? Like we
have to.
Right. Like we have no right to just stand back, especially considering we're such a tiny minority. We're one of the most hated minorities. So we have an obligation to ourselves, to our future generations, and also, honestly, to all of the Jewish allies, in the world. We can't expect, I always thought about this. I don't know I would love to get your take on this. How can we expect people to be our allies, non-Jews to be our allies, when so many of us take that back seat to our own defense, to our own to our own history, to our own, very proud, being. So I think that being tough mentally, like you said, physically, and standing up, for Jewish rights, we owe it to everyone, right? Like whether Jew, non-Jew, we owe it to the world, honestly.
We do 100% owe it to the world. You can't expect anyone to help you if you're not willing to help yourself. Exactly. And if you go back to what you just said, our history is full of amazing, amazing warriors. And, one simple example is the Maccabees, and who refused to sit idly by and watch everybody die. And that's the message, you can't, if you do nothing, you are nothing. As far as I'm concerned, if you want to close your window and your blinds and pretend it's not going on outside and then go on social media and say, oh, never again. Well, what are you telling me by typing never again?
Right.
You're typing 2 words, which amazing, but at the same time, how are you living by those words?
Exactly. Are you voting for the policies that, are pro-Israel? Are you voting for the policies that are, support anti-Semitism in our own countries? Like, how are you living those never again? Yeah. And unfortunately,
I agree.
there are a lot of hypocrites out there who and I used to be one of them, right? So one of the reasons Taking Back the Narrative even exists, because I was anti-Israel. Many of our audience knows, but some do not. So I always like to, injecture this when appropriate. I was anti-Israel for 20 years. And even though I grew up in a fairly Zionist home, my own grandmother lived in Netanya for 13 years. My own father got in trouble with the KGB back in Russia because he founded an underground Zionist group. This was in the 60s, the height of obviously Soviet anti-Semitism. All of that did not prevent me, even after having a bat mitzvah in Israel on top of Masada, and like you said, being very impressed with Jewish warriors. I remember there was a rabbi, we rented a rabbi, I was not religious, to transliterate the Haftarah portion. And he was talking about Anne Frank because I was in 8th grade, I had just learned about her. And of course, she was impressive to me on many levels, but then suddenly I heard about those Judean warriors and what they accomplished in that feat, right? So they refused to be slaves to the Romans. They were willing to sacrifice themselves and their people in that last stand, and how hard they fought back. And I remember at 13 years old being much more impressed by those Judean warriors that were, thousands of years separated from our reality, and thinking, wow, I want to know more about the Judean warriors. And then years later, when I already became a Zionist and saw the light, as people say, into that, in 2014, and I had in 2018 gone to Judea and Samaria, and I had a chance to stand on the hills of Judea and Samaria, and just thinking about those very proud, tough Judean warriors, and imagining and knowing that their bravery runs through the veins of every Jew today. That just something incredible.
We're my friend said it. He's a professional fighter in the UFC. We're sons and daughters of kings and queens. And that's not to be arrogant. That doesn't mean we're better than anybody else. It just means that our religion, our faith, our ethnicity, it's full of amazing, rich history. And you have to celebrate that. Not only celebrate it, you have to protect it. And you have to embrace the philosophy that stood behind it. I mean, I've interviewed, Holocaust survivors. I was in a documentary with one specifically, and I asked him a simple question. I said, back then, before the shit hit the fan, so to speak, did you see signs? Did you feel like it was coming? He said, 100%. He said, we saw it. And, those of us that could went and prepared to fight. Those of us that couldn't. And most didn't think it was coming. Most thought the government would take care of it. The police would take care of it. The authorities would take care of it. It was unconscionable that it would be what it was. And, unfortunately, so then I asked him, I said, so current times today, do you see those same signs? And not to be an alarmist, just do you see the similar signs? He said, worse. And I said, what do you mean? He said, the message can be spread so much faster. The hate grows so much quicker online than it could have back then. And, the misinformation is everywhere, where Jews, were the villains, and we own the world, and we're greedy and money hungry, and,
And
it's
apparently can control the weather, and we own all the media, which is interesting because the media is very anti-Jewish. So I
right,
always find that funny. We also have these dolphins that attack Hamas, apparently. I mean, it's just ridiculous. On and
right.
on, right?
Right. So it's just, I guess it's keeping our history on the forefront of your mind. And, even growing up with the rabbis teaching us, they always told us, to make sure that we always defended our people, make sure. And while they were teaching us, our books and our Torahs and our laws and whatever, they were always being tough about it. So they had that aura about them that they were tough. So, it made us feel like, okay, well, this is how we're supposed to be. And you grow up with that mindset. But more than anything, I think, I'm the type of person that if I see someone being attacked, it automatically triggers me. I can't sit back in my chair and just finish my sandwich and pretend it's not going on right there. And even if the odds are stacked against us, which they always are anyways, but God told us, we would always be small in numbers, but we would always be strong.
Absolutely. And I think you brought up some great points. So, and it is alarming, the rate of anti-Semitism, the intensity of it. But at the same time, do you feel a little bit more hopeful? Because we do have a very strong Israel, right? Israel's stronger than ever before. And you see it not just being in defensive mode. Now Israel is going into enemy territory. It's striking weapon caches in Syria. It has infiltrated Iran. There's a famous Muslim Zionist who has said, we're not just when he said we, obviously he means Israel, he said, we Israelis are not just in there to collect data. We're your grocer. We're part of the top security echelon. I mean, they have infiltrated. Or what happened in Iraq, back in the 80s, Israel, detonated the nuclear reactor, helping Americans, decades later when we invaded. It would have been a much, even worse ordeal than it was militarily and with casualties. And so something that you had said even before, right? It's that I think Israel is very in a unique position, right? Because so many countries around the world and in the Middle East rely on American defense, right? Something goes wrong, Americans had to go in and rescue them, defend them. There are no American boots on the ground in Israel. It's just Israelis. And so I think that's why, and I'm sure you would concur, and if you can expand on that a little bit more, that also really rolls into the Jews are tough. Like here you have this tiny country. It's what 1% of the Middle East. It had so many devastating wars, and yet here it is defending itself, not needing the backing of America, not needing the backing of Europe, doing it all on its own.
I honestly don't think that the world understands how powerful Israel really is, how powerful the military really is, how incredible the intel divisions are, how amazing that every single person, every Israeli citizen that joins the army at 18 years old is. I don't think they understand that they're being forced, to grow up, and they're being forced to risk their lives immediately, and they accept it and they do it and they embrace it. And, that's the difference. The world has no clue. And they also have no clue how crucial having Israel there is to world peace and to regimes not attacking other countries, because they understand that if they attack that country, Israel's going to respond because Israel's in the way. And so you know, there's a lot of this demonizing of Israel falsely, and I'll always say falsely, not a shred of truth to it. And all anybody has to do is visit Israel to understand that there's no apartheid, there's no genocide, there's no, like I saw a movie on Netflix the other night, and, you know, the woman was saying, yes, my family lives in the Gaza Strip and, you know, it's genocide what's going on there. And I was just rolling my eyes going, are you serious? Like, doesn't anybody fact check these things before? Like, and I'll pay for the plane ticket. Like, go, you know.
I wish I could too. And you're right. Like, first of all, you can stay in luxury hotels in Gaza. Where do you think the press stays? The press doesn't stay in those, you know, fake camps. That they stay there, you know, in actual hotels. And there's nice restaurants and there's Airbnbs. Of course, there's poverty, but I was just in Israel and we went to the Erez Crossing, and the Jewish director there, who's number 2, is a Gazan, a proud Muslim. And he said, our goal is to bring in more Gazans into Israel to work. And he was saying that, you know, the more, obviously they pass through security, they go through Shin Bet. It's not an open border, not like we have here on the southern border. They do it correctly over there. But he was saying that, you know, so much of it is just economic. Once they see that Israel benefits the Gazans economically, they're less likely to support Hamas. And
Right.
even when we saw a lot of the Gazans crossing, and of course, you know, we couldn't take any videos of them. And they said, you know, we can't say this on the other side of the border. We can say this here, but F Hamas. That's what they were always saying. And I don't think anyone paid them to say that, because they were just going about their business, crossing back into Gaza. But, you know, Israel does so much economically, like you said, with security. And can you imagine? This is what I was always thinking. Imagine if Israel unleashes its full military might, what it has the capability to do. So the fact that it does not and keeps the peace and measures itself, it's incredible in its tactics.
It's that philosophy that I was talking about, that we defend ourselves. And part of the halacha, part of the law, is that we try to negotiate peace as much as possible. Part of it says we have to try to make peace. You know, whether it's a street fight or a war, we have to try to negotiate before we go straight to fighting. You know, for me, it's a case by case. You know, I'll have to, you know, look at it when I get there, because, you know, sometimes the enemy will see that as a sign of weakness, you know, and they'll take advantage of that. And, you know, unfortunately for them, that they do. The other part of it is we're not allowed to kill innocents. We're not allowed to destroy innocents. So Israel goes out of their way to drop leaflets and to warn people. And I mean, I know it's funny to the Western world, like you're warning them before you bomb them. But I get it. We don't want one innocent life being taken. And I would hate for that to happen. You know, of course they stage, you know, events to make it look like innocent people died, but we've all seen those videos where the guy has a cigarette lit and he's supposed to be dead and he's getting in trouble for it. You know, we've all seen that BS stuff. So
or the human shields that they use. I mean, it's, you know, unfortunately, you know, we value life and a lot of our enemies do not. And not to say that the entire population of, you know, our enemies does not value life, but unfortunately their leaders, they sacrifice them.
So I mean, listen, you're right. But if you really break it down and think about it, you know, we constantly read that we value life, that they value death. But really, do they value death, or have they been brainwashed to believe that death is going to be a better situation for them than starving or, you know, whatever their situations are home? You know, it's such a warped sense of reality for them. And I'll tell you, I wouldn't want to face that. I mean, you know, I honestly wouldn't want to face that and have to wake up to a government that's, you know, a terroristic government, first of all, that you're afraid to speak at any given time because they'll kidnap you and throw you in a hole somewhere. I mean, it's got to be very taxing on them. It's got to be very hard way to live. So, you know, of course they're going to say, "Oh no, we support the government. Yes, we that bad Israel over there." You know, what are they going to say? They're going to stand up and say, you know, no. They're going to get their heads chopped off instantly. So it's, you know, the answer is to try to make peace with their government. It's impossible. Their government doesn't want peace. They want to remain, you know, sort of victims to the world so that they can keep collecting billions and billions in aid, you know. So for me,
it's all
that's
economical.
that's the easy answer. You know, why is there no world? Why is there no peace in the Middle East? That's why. And a lot of these bigger Arab countries that are now aligning with Israel, they know it, they see it, and they're sick of it. And they're like, you know what? Okay, it was fine for the first 100 years. Enough's enough. You know, like, let's be real about this. These guys are, you know, they haven't done anything wrong to you. They're not killing you indiscriminately. And if there was such a genocide, if there was such apartheid, you know, doesn't the world think that these powerful Arab countries would attack Israel, would go against it immediately?
Or there would be more outrage within our own communities. Like, you know, if Israel practiced actual apartheid or had real occupation, I would be the first one to speak out. You probably would be the first one to speak out. I would never support any country, whether it's a homeland, an adopted country, whatever, if it had those practices like South
We
Africa.
don't have it in us. It's not in our blood. We don't have that type of evil in us to do stuff like that. We just don't. And maybe that's a bad thing or maybe it's a good thing, but we don't have it. And, you know, for us, it's like we embrace our neighbor. If our neighbor is a Muslim Arab and they're good people, then we bring them over food on Shabbat and say, here, this is for your family. Or, you know, if their grass needs cutting, we'll cut it. You know, like, we're just that type of people. And the world of, you know, the BDS world and, you know, all those idiots, they're like just sheep that, you know, follow the leader. And we all know who the leader is. And, you know, it's just such a false, you know, lie. It's just such bullshit, you know, because I've been to Israel and I would welcome him or any of his cronies to go there and take a look on the ground at what really goes on, you know, as opposed to this genocide.
I'm actually going to go a little step further. And I know that BDS was a major deal when it first was rolled out, but I don't know your thoughts, but my thoughts right now from what I'm seeing, I think expanding so much energy within the Jewish community to fight BDS at this point, I think it's pointless because BDS has been defeated every single time.
Right.
And unfortunately, a lot of the proponents of BDS have been self-hating Jews. And we see that there was a folk band that just canceled, what was it, a couple of weeks ago, to play in Israel. Well, their drummer, I think their drummer was Israeli. And that Israeli was the one who pushed the cancellation. Meanwhile, you have major artists like who was just there, Kanye West, Andrea Bocelli was just at the hotel.
50 Cent was just there.
50 Cent was just there. Oh, he like loves Israel. I remember being there 2015. There was a big billboard for 50 Cent. Jennifer Lopez was there. Iggy Azalea was just there for Pride Week in Tel Aviv. So Israel does not have a shortage of artistic interest in performing there. Plus, Israel has its own great repertoire of artists, right? So I don't think the Israeli audience is missing out. And I think that focusing so much on a defeatist attempt at delegitimizing Israel actually, in a way, detracts from actual anti-Semitic policies towards Israel. So I think that we've reached a point where we just need to pivot away from BDS. And I also really believe that what BDS is seeking attention, right? So they're having this anti-Semitic hissy fit. So why, and they're acting like anti-Semitic toddlers, like toddler syndrome. So why are we fueling that fire, right? So I think the more we ignore them, it's going to die out even further.
That was my father's philosophy. That was always my dad's philosophy. Let them scream at a brick wall. Don't give them a target.
I love that.
Um,
I'm gonna quote your father in I'm writing an op-ed actually about how to deal with BDS at this point, and also to treat it as it is, right? It's so now in America at least it has turned actual anti-Semitic, right? Like I know in Boston they're targeting Jewish businesses. So pivot towards that, pivot towards anti-Semitism in general, not just, oh, look what it's doing to Israel, look what it's doing to Israel. I was just in Israel. Israel's doing far better than Canada and the US combined.
well, that's why every top tech giant is
Right.
in Israel. So
Exactly.
if you know nothing else about Israel, know that,
Right.
because that will tell you everything you need to know.
That's what they say, right? So they say it facetiously, but the bird of Israel is the crane because of so many building projects there, and the unofficial animal of Israel is the unicorn because of so many tech giants and tech IPOs. It's just wonderful, and they're not suffering financially like we are, like your country is. It's very different, and we have now investments pouring into Israel from Saudi Arabia, from the UAE. Saudi Arabia that doesn't even have official relations, but they just announced that they're going to be investing millions of dollars into certain tech companies. No one, if you even imagine this 20, 30 years ago, it just wouldn't even have been a probability.
No.
And like you said, when we talk about Gaza, when we talk about the terrorists who have occupied 2/3 of Judea and Samaria, we're talking about obviously the Palestinian Authority. It's all propaganda, right? Because when we look at the actual polls and they ask like, oh, would you rather be a citizen of Israel? Would you rather be under the PA? Overwhelmingly, those Arabs say we'd rather be citizens of Israel. And they don't support, the PA. They don't support murdering of Jews. And having been to the UAE, and another thing I would love to touch up with you, whether now or a little bit further in the conversation, because I do know that you provide security detail to prominent, Muslim figures. Some in our community, in the Jewish community, they'll say like all Muslims hate Jews or all Muslims hate Israel. But then again, having been in the UAE, they're not acting like the leadership in Gaza. They're not acting like the PA, right? And of course, they were anti-Israel for many years, but very rapidly they're pro-Israel, they're pro-Jewish. And of course, I would never feel at home in an Arab country. I did not feel at home in the UAE like I do in Israel, but I felt very comfortable. And I felt very much more comfortable in the UAE than anywhere in Europe. And I've traveled extensively in Europe. And so it just this, like we are related, they're also Semites and there are genetic cousins. And I feel when there is that normalization attempt, there could be no better force than Muslims and Jews together.
I couldn't agree more. It's funny because I constantly say that, once the light goes on and people see the truth, you can't turn away from it. Once you've seen it, you've seen it. It's like a train crash. Once you saw it, that's it. You can't unsee it. And you can, formulate a scenario in your mind based on lies and then build up a hatred for a people, country, whatever, based on the lies. But as soon as you see the truth and the reality, what are you going to say? That's why the first thing I like to say to people is, let me get you a plane ticket. Let me get you over there. Go there for 4, 3, 5 days, whatever you want. Just go look around. You base it on your experience. Don't worry about me. Go there. And because I know after you see it for like 10 minutes, you'll understand, oh, this was all false stuff being fed to me my whole life. And, I think you're right. The tides are turning. The BDS movement is just a fringe, thing now. It's very small. It's marginal at best. And yeah, it's a bunch of, in my opinion, temper tantrum kids, like that are just, they need to scream at something. They need a focal point. They need to like hate something in order to make their, day better or feel like they're achieving something or accomplishing something. you know. But I mean, these social justice warriors, you know, why aren't they feeding homeless? You know, why aren't they going after orphans and taking care of the orphanages and do that, you know, like do something constructive for God's sakes, you know, going after a country and its products that are being exported to the world that the world is dying to buy. You know, I buy Israeli any chance I get.
Me too. Me too.
I will go out of my way to buy Israeli, and I will, you know, pick something that's, even if it's more expensive, I'm buying it because when I use it at home, it puts that smile on my face. You know, that's Israeli. It's all I need to know. And you know, at the end of the day, I think our community just has to get stronger, just has to get more vocal, and you know, really start coming out of their homes and seeing what's going on. You know, I tell people, open your windows. You know, it's all you have to do. Open the blinds and watch what's going on. You know, don't just never again on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, you know. And I mean, listen, I get a lot of messages and you know, thankfully now my publicist deals with that. But, you know, I was getting a lot of hateful messages, and or something as simple as I must be an anti-Semite because I'm a Zionist. And I'm like, okay, so now I have to explain to this person what Zionism means. In its simplest form, because I don't want to sit there and engage with this person for an hour. But that's part of the work. And even if I can't change his mind, even if he's nuts and he's never going to change his mind, at least I can walk away saying, I told him the truth. You know, I gave him the truth, not my version of the truth, the truth.
The actual truth. And don't you love getting hate messages? Because I remember getting my first hate message 7-8 years ago. I think I cried when I got it. Now I love the hate messages more than, oh, I agree with you, because that means that your content is triggering the other person. And like you said, that is the only avenue to then attempt to correct the misinformation through those messages, whether they believe you or not. And actually, and I'm sure you have had this in your own life, given the work that you do so well. There was this Egyptian who kept messaging me, you know, hate message after hate message for years and years. Finally, I see about a year ago that he has an Egyptian Zionism account. And at first I thought, oh, this is just some kind of troll account. No, he somehow turned the leaf. And I reached out to him and I said, oh, interesting to see this type of you know, work that you're doing. And he said, I just learned how much the Egyptian government has been lying to us, right? Because like they
Wow.
told them about the Yom Kippur War and how they won and how awful Jews were. And he said that, you know, just your content made me research a little bit more. And obviously I couldn't find it through Egyptian means. Like I went outside, and obviously now the world is more connected. So you just never know. Some of those, the worst hate messages can actually you know, filter into positivity down
And
the road.
I think that's always our goal. I think our goal is always to turn a negative into a positive because, you know, listen, as Jews, we don't want to give up. We don't want to walk away with our heads down saying, you know, that sucks. You know,
Right.
there's nothing we can do about that. There's always something you can do, you know, and I mean, and that's part of being a tough Jew. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You know, it's changing somebody's mindset that hated the Jewish community and hated Israel. There's nothing more badass than that to me. And a lot of the people that I work with are dedicated to doing that nonstop, you know, and that's why your, you know, taking back the narrative sort of like resonated with me because I'm all about it. I'm not about, you know, hating anybody. We don't hate anybody. We don't have it in our bones. Like we just don't, you know.
And unfortunately, we do have some members of our community, unfortunately, and I go after them. I'm sure you go after them too, who, you know, they'll say, you know, and they'll be like pro-Israel, but then they'll say like, oh, like, you know, we hate Muslims. Like, first of all, like you said, how can you hate 1.6 billion people. And then they'll say, oh, well, they're trying to kill us. I said, 1.6 billion people are not trying to kill Jews. And if they did, none of us would be here because we are less than the population of Seoul, South Korea. So if so many people were actually trying to kill us, we would have a problem. And
listen, if you watch the most prominent imams or sheikhs in the world and you listen to how they speak, these are the most peaceful people in the world, the most peaceful. And I've met thousands, and they were all incredibly peaceful, amazing, God-fearing, peace-loving individuals, family-oriented, just want to live their lives and get through the day like the rest of us. But the focus, and I guess media, whatever you want to blame for it, the focal point is always on the radicals. The radicals sort of drive the agenda. And Bridget Gabriel said it best. You know, she said in Nazi Germany, only 10% of the Germans were Nazis.
actually, it was 6%. It was even less.
6%. Okay. So, but they, you know, drove the agenda because the majority was silent. Therefore, they were irrelevant. And I feel like, you know, if the Muslim world came out with the truth, I mean, it would render the radicals irrelevant too. It would work like clockwork. It would be an overnight success. You want world peace? That's how it's done. Because, you know, they're like us. They get wrapped up in their lives and they're doing their own thing and raising their kids and whatever. And they're just doing life things. You know, so this is sort of a sidebar to them. It's like, yeah, let the radicals scream. It doesn't affect us, you know.
And you make a great point too, right? Because you said like, no, these imams, the mainstream ones, the radicals, they're peaceful. And if you think about, we talked quite a bit about the Holocaust, right? And you know, how Jews are perceived weak. What was the Holocaust? It was the culmination of 2,000 years of Christian anti-Semitism, not Muslim anti-Semitism. And then you had a Muslim country. And of course, you know, I'll have a podcast a little bit later in the summer about the Mufti and all the damage that he has done. But then you had a Muslim country, Albania, that saved Jews. So the Holocaust was a Christian, you know, the pogroms, the expulsions, and then this was the final, right? Like the final piece. And so after the Holocaust, I think, well, it seems that Christianity went through this massive reformation, right? Like, oh, you know, look what happened. This can never happen again. And now Islam is beginning its own reforms, its own reformation, right? And a lot of Muslims, you know, very much applaud that. And they said like, okay, you know, now it's our turn, right? You know, in a way, Judaism like went through our own reformation, you know, like that, you know, like we no longer sacrifice animals, we no longer do a lot of things, right? That, you know, we've done in the past. So I think that being the younger of the three religions, the three main monotheistic religions, you know, it's going to take some time, but, and look how you said, like speedily things are moving, right? Suddenly Israel is welcomed into the Arab NATO. It's very much part of the GCC. It has now not so secret, you know, communication talks with Saudi Arabia. There's now a chief rabbi of Saudi Arabia. It's moving at lightning speed. And I would be remiss if we didn't get a chance to talk about, so we were talking about, you know, like being there, changing people's minds mentally, but there's also that physicality of being a tough Jew. And it would be great to hear a little bit more about your experience as a security consultant for synagogues and Jewish events. So how did that all begin? And I remember offline, you were telling me about a story, how you had sent in decoys into a synagogue.
Right.
Completely scaring the rabbi and alerting him that he actually needs security. So I think that's fascinating for an audience to hear that there's a lot going behind the scenes, and someone so prominent as yourself, like, you know, just to give a little bit more insight into that.
So yeah, I don't want to give all the secrets away and tell people how to attack us.
No.
And what are
like, how did you get into this? And
yeah, for sure. Well, listen, we have our weaknesses like every community does. And you know, a bunch of, and it's always been with a group of my friends. it's always been a bunch of us that are dedicated to protecting the community. It's never been me by myself saying, this is my, lifelong goal. I felt it internally for sure. And I knew this was my calling. But it was always done with the help or at the behest of friends saying, hey, let's get this done. My dad was at a synagogue the other day and it was pretty bad. There was just a bunch of randoms that walked in there and could have done anything. Or this shul was attacked, or that shul, or that rabbi was beat up, or whatever, So it was out of necessity that was born. And to that end, it wasn't always easy to convince rabbis that they needed security. And so, yes, I had to test that theory, a few times, and I had to send decoys in and plant, bags, walking right past their police, their security guard, with a few words to them. And then, putting a bag somewhere and then calling on the rabbi and bringing that bag to his attention and saying, how safe really are you? Because in that bag, there could have been anything.
And then I think you also had mentioned that you had the decoys dress as religious Jews, right? Like I see
Right.
Jews.
Right.
And we see that, also like in Israel, some of the terrorists dress up as Hasidic Jews here as well. Is there anything that can be done about that? I mean, is there any identifiable piece of clothing that, is actually not authentic, that some of these terrorists miss, that the rabbis can be more keen on? Or is that the work that you provide as a security consultant,
Yeah. I mean, we really go in and we take a look at every aspect of their security, including what the congregants will be wearing at a service. And anybody, out of the norm gets questioned and gets questioned vigorously. So there have been instances where, they've stolen Hasidic garb, the clothing the Hasidic men wear, and they've tried to infiltrate an event to attack it or whatever their motivations were. Unfortunately, they were wearing the wrong one for the day of the week that it was, and they stood out like a sore thumb. That was lucky that happened, though. But anyone that I work with anywhere around the world, will be extremely vigilant about checking people and training people to check people before they ever get close to a venue. And that's the message. I mean, you can never be too careful. You can be sure that they're trying. They're always trying to attack. There was an alert that went out a couple days ago in a state in the U.S.
Texas, it's San Antonio, Jewish community.
Right, in San Antonio. And they said that, be careful because there is a credible threat that there's going to be an attack. We don't know where, but it's going to happen. So now, rather than have everybody stay home, get security, get proper security, not security where you're calling a security company and they're sending you one guard in a yellow jacket. That's not proper security. Get proper Jewish security. And I'm happy to consult anywhere around the world and what that means and how it's way above any security that you can hire typically. Because, we have to get lucky every single day of the week. They have to get lucky once.
That's a good point. Exactly.
And that's the message.
And then do you also work, I think you had mentioned to me offline that you also work with the police, right? So is that a symbiotic relationship? Do they welcome, people like yourself? Or...
So the only aspect, what I mean by that is that, so in Canada, for instance, you're not allowed to carry guns. It's not like the US. You're not allowed to carry guns. Even if you're doing security, you can't, unless you're guarding money, You can't carry guns in Canada. So we have to hire off-duty police officers to come to the venue to stand at the door or outside or inside or whatever, because then you've got an armed officer with you. And so for that, we need them. And yeah, it's definitely a cohesive relationship. It works, because they provide a service that we pay for. And we know at high risk venues with high profile subjects that, at least there's a gun in the house. Where, when we work in the US, we can, we take care of that all day long. That's not an issue. All my guys are armed in the States, so it's not a problem. So it's just Canada that we have that real, challenge where it's like, okay, well, a baton's only going to hit a guy so far. You know what I mean? If he's holding a Glock, like, what are you going to do? Right. So, yeah, I mean, security is something that has been lacking in the Jewish community for decades. And, I believe the leaders of the organizations and the synagogues have this mentality like, oh, we don't need it. Nothing's ever happened. Well, you've been lucky.
Exactly. Right.
So far that nothing. Yeah. They're going to be lucky once. And when they're lucky that one time, you're going to wish you had that security. And it's like that old saying, I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
So you were mentioning guns, and we were talking a little bit offline before. And it's something that I have just been dumbfounded how much resistance there is to guns in the overall Ashkenaz community here. I mean, I'm just talking as an American. I don't know what it's like in Canada. I hope it's a little bit better up there. So again, I'm first generation American. My parents are from Russia. So the first thing they did when they came here and made a little bit of money was buy a rifle, because they said, our government took away guns from the citizens. So better be sure we're protecting ourselves from not only, a potential robber, but against the government. And again, we've saw in the past couple of years how much restrictions have been imposed on people and how that's ever expanding, no matter what side you are. I'm pro-vaccine, but it's just, we see that, that the rights of the people are continuing to be minimized at the whim of a government. I saw what happened with the convoy in Canada. So I have wanted to know, right, is there a little bit more of a background, like why Ashkenazim are a little bit more anti-gun? I see Sephardim are more pro, and I'm a little bit confused, and I'm quite honestly just dumbfounded, because in the Holocaust, right? So the reason why so many Jews ended up in the position we did, because guns were confiscated from Jews. It's the first thing they did, right? So when people accuse us of Jews are weak, Jews are this, well, there were machine guns pointed at Jews, and we didn't even have rifles in many instances. So just knowing the history of what our people went through during the Shoah, during the Farhud, there were labor camps even in North Africa and Algeria and Tunisia. We're finding out recently why this hesitancy.
I think you hit it. You hit it. The Sephardic community typically has shown more ability to fight than the Ashkenaz. Ashkenaz tend to focus on business, family, which of course they should, and community events. Not to say that Sephardim don't do the same thing. We do, and then some. But it's a mindset that our parents instilled in us, where you have to defend yourself, because listen, we were the odd man out. My skin is dark, and most of the Ashkenaz guys I grew up with, they're all fair skinned. And so I was definitely, the odd man out. And so that sort of discrimination in itself was felt at an early age. And, the need to be tougher was also felt. And I think that goes hand in hand with weapons. It's still that old mentality that, oh, we don't need guns. We don't need that in the house. We don't need that. We have the police. Well, let me ask you a question. If your home is under attack, if somebody gets through your door or window, you're going to pick up a phone and say, 911, I need an officer here. So at best response time, at best, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, best.
If that, I live in New York and there's, police everywhere, but I mean, well, not on the streets anymore, but there's precincts by me. By the time they get into my apartment, it's probably
Right.
going to be 10 minutes.
Right. So the thing is, I want to arm the population so that they are ready in case that happens. And a lot of them think that's being an alarmist. We live in a society where we don't need it. Well, you're not looking at statistics if that's what you believe, because 60% of the hate crimes go against the Jewish community, and for such a small community to have that high of a stat, I mean, it's got to tell you something. You're hated. So the fact that you're hated, you're going to be attacked. And if you don't defend yourself or arm yourself, I mean, listen, all my friends in Florida, they laugh at us. Mm-hmm. They're all armed, every man, every woman. They've all got amazing abilities. They've all trained. They didn't just go out and buy a gun and say, we're going to carry a Glock in the glove box. Mm-hmm. They've all trained. Some of them have done tactical training. A lot of my friends were in the IDF that live in the States, and they all teach people what to do because, someone suggested to me not long ago that I've got a program teaching Krav Maga to kids in Florida right now and other states. And so they said, what you should do is also teach a program for women that carry weapons. And I thought, you know what? That's genius, because by the time someone grabs a woman from behind and they open the zipper of their purse and then take out the gun and try to, it's already too late. So what to do in that scenario is the course, how to get the gun out quicker, how to, make sure that, you get rid of your attacker real fast. So that's something that's in the pipeline, that's in the works. I just believe strongly that responsible gun ownership is the way to go. And you always have the naysayers that'll say, like I saw a comedian that said, he was from England, and he said, I can explain it to you very easily. If I gave you a mobile phone, are you more or less likely to use it? I'm like, a mobile phone's not going to save your life.
And it's very, very different. Well, maybe it could save your life in some instances, but not like this. Plus,
no.
99.99% of people who have guns do not use it for ill unless they are, attacked, unless they're in danger. So I don't understand how anyone in the right mind can compare a mobile phone with a gun.
Legal gun ownership. These people do not commit crimes. No, These people are like, I don't know what the statistic is of that population committing crimes, but I'd have to imagine it's like point nothing, because it's all the illegal guns. So if you take away gun ownership, all you're doing is you're disarming people and telling the criminals that guy's unarmed, so go get him.
Right. Like how many crimes have been prevented because a legal gun owner just showed a gun, right? Like showed that they're armed, and then the attacker backed off. Right. So I think the laws need to be amended. But you're right. I think more Jews really need to put an emphasis on being educated on guns, not being afraid of guns. Surprisingly, there is a gun range here in New York, in Chelsea, and I've been about 3 or 4 times. And one of the proudest moments, not just my own, shooting capability, which I was a little shocked by, but it was pretty good. I have pretty good aim, was where I saw the lockers, and there was a locker with a massive Magen David on it. And I went with a couple of my Jewish friends to the gun range, and we just gravitated towards it. It was like, we need to learn more about this guy. And we started talking to the range owners, and they said, you'd be surprised how diverse we really are. And it's true that when I first came in, I had to take a safety class. Everyone does. There were Asian women there. There were, Black people from Harlem. Our instructor was a Hispanic, from the Bronx. Actually, there were no white people there. So anyone who thinks that gun owners or people who are interested in guns and learning how to use them or learning how to shoot are just white people, they're sadly mistaken, even in New York City.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an important message to get across these days, and responsible legal gun ownership, training, constant training. We have, a friend in Israel who protects the hills. He's got an organization, an amazing guy.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. Ben.
He's great. I'm actually going to visit him next time I'm in Israel.
He's awesome. And
his name, Ben Goldstein.
Of course, I love him. Unity Warriors.
Yes.
And Ben is an amazing shot from what I could see. And he trains all the time. He's constantly training. And
on Facebook, actually.
And that's the message, that, you can do it responsibly. You can be effective in your community responsibly. And, you don't have to be afraid of it. There's nothing to be afraid of. It will save a life. And if you do it, if you follow the reasons why guns were, developed and to protect and, to save, not to rob and to pillage and maim and whatever, if you follow that mentality and you do it responsibly, you'll never have a problem. And I mean, the confidence level that, again, I'm in Canada, so I can't tell you I know what it is here. But God willing, one day, I'll be able to tell you, because that'll change. But
you'll have a different government, hopefully.
No, it would need a whole different government. Don't even get me started on that.
We can have a whole podcast on Canadian politics.
We can have a whole week on Canadian politics. That's a disaster in itself, but there is promise in the future. It's coming.
And it's interesting what you said about, with Israel, right? I remember visiting my cousin in Israel a couple of years before the pandemic. Actually, it was 2018. And, he came into Jerusalem. He lived in Male Adumim. And I noticed his holster. And I said, oh, do you have a gun? He's like, well, it's concealed carry here. Like, I can't just whip it out, but I'll show you. So he showed it to me. And immediately I felt so safe. I mean, Jerusalem is safe overall, but we went into some areas that were a little bit, on not on the most popular radar.
East.
Well, I don't like to say East Jerusalem. I don't like to say West Jerusalem.
I know.
So certain neighborhoods, but anyway, but just knowing that he had a gun, I mean, hell, I felt so safe. But it was something else we were talking. Oh, something else I'd love to mention. I think to our audience to consider this. Israel was liberated, right? I hate to say created, all that. It was liberated. It was liberated by Jews. Jews gave their blood, for almost 20 years to liberate it. And it would not have been accomplished without guns, right? Jews, of course, stealing guns, stockpiling guns. You had the bullet factory that was run by the Haganah that was making made 2 million bullets secretly. All of that was necessary to win those wars, right? Yeah. So, and to push the British out, to then, win against the Arabs in multiple wars. So in a way, for any Jew to say that they're anti-gun, it's spitting on the bravery that it took to liberate Jews. I
think it's lazy mentality that says that, though. I think it's very, it's easier for somebody to say, oh, I don't like guns, because they don't want to have to process what it means to be able to get to that point where they actually become responsible gun owners, so to them, they just shut down an idea rather than have to deal with it, because it's not something they feel that they need to begin with. But I think that's such a falsehood. I mean, if I could have, everybody, at least arming their homes, then I would say do it. That's a great thing to have, because listen, if you're a criminal and you've got the population around you that's armed, you're not breaking into any houses. There's no home invasions. There's no kidnappings. There's no it's not going to happen, because you're going to get shot. Like that's it. There's no two ways about it,
Exactly. And then what do you think? I know you do so much with Krav Maga and children. What do you think about, is the tide turning a little bit where Jewish children or Jewish parents are realizing that training is necessary, like that's more needed? Because I know in my own childhood, my parents insisted that I take karate. Like it was not even a question. It's like, okay, well, you can be on the softball team, you can play tennis, you can take ice skating lessons all you want, you're going to take karate. And so I did from the time I was 9 years old to 14. And a lot of what I learned has stayed with me here as an adult. And I was telling you offline before that, someone tried to grab me a couple years ago, and I used the techniques from how many years back to push away. I mean, obviously, luckily they didn't have a gun. If it was a gun, completely different situation. But I felt so empowered, right? Like here I was in this vulnerable state, and I was able to fend for myself. So how do you see the culture now are more Jewish children asking to be put into these Krav Maga classes? Is the parents driving this?
I think it's mostly, well, anytime we see a surge in attacks, anytime we see a rising in attacks anywhere in the world, we get a lot of phone calls, we get a lot of messages. We planted the seeds and said, listen, it would never hurt for your kids to be trained. And we started this initiative, and we're taking it around the world, and we built an amazing team, to help us do it. And it's important. So, the kids, it depends what age group they are. The younger ones, they don't embrace it as much as the older ones. The younger ones are sort of like, let's play games, let's have some fun, let's run, let's whatever, which is cool, whatever, but there's that starting point, that age group where they take it seriously. They know this is to save their life potentially in the future, and they really embrace it. The parents, I'd say for the majority, they support it and encourage it and ask for it. There are some that feel after a few classes that, no, my kid doesn't need it. He should go back to, playing basketball. And good for him, God willing, he never needs it. But, I prefer to have those kids around me that know it, and not need it, than need it and not know it, so.
That makes sense. Yeah. And I think that ideally, especially people who are identifiably Jewish, like a lot of the Hasidic, I think that should be standard for
that's my target demographic. So we work with a lot of the Chabads, and my target demographic is the most visible Jewish population first. And we'll do anybody, of course, we'll train anybody, but I want the most visible Jew, because he's the most likely, or she's the most likely to be attacked. And I'll tell you, hands down, the girls, their classes, they're amazing. And they're so attentive, they're so good, they're so quick to learn the skills. The boys are sort of like, typical boys. They just want to mess around and have fun and, goof off and whatever. But back to what you said, that you learned something how many years ago, and it applied, to your recent life, where God forbid something could have happened and you stopped it because you had that knowledge. And it's so important.
It's that muscle memory that just does not go away.
Yeah. No, once you have it, you have it. I mean, Krav Maga is something that you need to constantly keep up and constantly train. And you sort of have to also be, somewhat in shape in order to utilize what is being taught to you. You have to be able to do it, right? Like you have to be effective at striking and kicking and holding and whatever. But anything in terms of self-defense is a step in the right direction, and especially in the Jewish community. I think it should be in schools' curriculum. I don't think it should be something that's like, optional. I think it should be mandatory. You need to learn how to defend yourself.
Absolutely, especially in the, like you said, like the Jewish day schools and yeshivas, like, like no one's going to be attacking me on the streets thinking I'm a Jew, because I don't, like, obviously I'm not visibly Jewish, but unless, like, I obviously go to the Israel Day parade, I drape the Israeli flag proudly over me, then obviously, and even then when I do that, I do feel more on alert and I'm ready to strike if need be. So I think that's a skill, and I'm so happy that there are people like you who are taking the initiative to do this. So I would not want to conclude this conversation without asking you about, you go by, or you have a nickname, the Bear Jew. So how did that name come about? That to me is really fascinating.
So two things. One, my mother, God rest her, used to call me her teddy bear because I was always this big dude, and two, since that movie came out years ago, and there was a character in it that was the Bear Jew who would, take the baseball bat to anybody he had to. I just started hearing people calling me by that. Like, I also have a tattoo of a bear holding a baseball bat, oddly enough. And so it just became sort of second nature. It just became like, quote unquote, my street name, the Bear Jew. There's other guys out there that call themselves the Bear Jew, and that's great. I welcome, thousands of Bear Jews for all as far as I'm concerned. It's not an issue at all. I love it.
Absolutely. And so I also wanted to share with the audience that you are, like I mentioned in the beginning, in the intro, that you're a recent author. It's called Hate 2.0, One Man's Journey to Becoming a Tough Jew. So I wanted to know, so how did this book come about? I guess the timing, like why now? And what would you like the readers or the people listening right now, like the top takeaways from?
I think that's, a great series of questions. I'm the type of person that doesn't really give that stuff a lot of thought. Why did I do it? I felt that it was needed. I felt it was necessary to tell my story. I felt that it would resonate with a lot of readers out there, where they would see themselves in me and say, ultimately, why did I do it? My goal is that other people will then feel empowered to stand up for their community and stand up for Israel and really be a proud Jew. And to also, show people that, there's nothing wrong with, the term Zionism. There's nothing wrong with being a Zionist. And, they're trying to distort that word. They're trying to make it like a bad thing when really they're saying we hate Jews. Instead of saying we hate Jews, they say we hate Zionists. We don't mind Jews. Well, I can see straight through that, and so can you. So in the book, I sort of go into that, and my main motivation, if I'm being honest, was just to tell my stories, just to sort of try to motivate other people to do likewise, to do the same types of things that I do, and see if one person can do it, why can't another person? I'm no different than anybody else. My stories aren't, okay, so some of them are very unique, but it's not a life of glitz and glamour. It's more just, getting into my community that I love and getting into the country that I love and just, supporting it in any way I can. Never really looking to battle with anybody, never looking for fights, never hating anybody. I'm sort of an even keeled kind of guy, excuse me, until I'm not, and typically that's just me. So, I mean, in the book, I go real deep into that stuff, and I felt like it was very important for me to get it out. And luckily, I have an amazing team behind me, of editors and publicists, and, that are just like, I couldn't have done it without them. I can honestly say that. It would have just been all in my head, and it's just, writing is just something where I never imagined I would write a book, let alone publish one. But now that I have, it sparked that fuel where I want to do another one now. It's like I'm starting to think of titles now and concepts.
So soon you're going to have a series of books. So I very proudly bought your book just a couple of days ago. And what I'll do, so when we're going to post this podcast, I'll include a link to your book as well, because it's worth reading. And having talked to you, like beforehand and during this interview, you have so much wisdom, you have such great life experience, and you're truly moving the Jewish community forward and in the right direction. I could not have been more honored to have you on, and I look forward to more conversations with you.
It was a true pleasure, Lorene. I really enjoyed this, and I hope that people have learned from it, and I hope that people will support your initiative and your organization, and really, get boots on the ground and start moving this ball forward, like I like to say. So thank you for having me on.
And you as well. And I think the greatest takeaway from this is that not only is it not bad to be a tough Jew, it's commended.
I agree. I would say that everybody can. And then the other thing is everybody can do it. You don't have to train your whole life. It's a mindset. That's all it is. It's just a mindset. Just, I'm not going to take it. That's the mindset.
Exactly.
That's it.
We're proud Zionists. We're proud and tough Jews. And honestly, I think the future is bright for the Jewish people.
Amen. Amen. God willing.
Have a great day. And thank you so much for tuning in.
All the best. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.